You're a big proponent of educators and schools, and we love that. You live in the DC area, you do consulting. So those of you who are on tonight who want to tap more of the wisdom than you'll be able to experience in just this 1 hour, Caroline, you do so much, and we're so grateful to have you here with us tonight. So just to kind of get us started, we're wondering if, first of all, you're welcome to say a little bit more about yourself that we haven't shared, but also we want to hear from your perspective, sort of where this book comes from and why you chose to write it.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Ife, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today. I want to offer a big shout out to Winsome Bingham of Raycraft Books, who helped put us together in this space, and also to my editor, Eileen Robinson, who made the deal for this book and has been so beautiful in helping bring it to life, along with Wiley Blevins, who's also an editor at Raycraft, and Sunita Apte, who is an editor as well. They're all on the team that said yes to say their names, and I'm so grateful to all of them for making this book happen. So I think more about who I am and my journey will come out as we have our conversation today. So thank you for the beautiful introduction. And I'd like to start off with where the journey for this particular book began. And it began on Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. And we've got some pictures from my first visit there, and how that visit inspired this book. So it was a real sort of an innocent moment in my life when I just wanted to be there. I wanted to be in solidarity with the movement. And so I went there, and you can see the billboards, the street, the people. This was a quieter day. The fence that was in front of the White House, the poster about Breonna Taylor. I went there and I just took in everything that's around me. There was a big sign that I'm standing in front of the White House. This is that famous church, St. John, where there's a Black Lives Matter sign. This was another church that had this sign, love one another. So I was there and I was just taking it all in, and my plan was to do an Instagram post. This is an image of the White House through that black iron fence that they put up in front of the park. This is a t-shirt. There were a number of vendors on the street selling t-shirts, Black empowerment t-shirts. Later, they put up signs to indicate, what had happened at Black Lives Matter Plaza. And so some of these signs, these banners, have the names of those that we've lost to police violence and racial violence. This is a picture of two boys from New Jersey and their father. They participated in Black Lives Matter protests. And so before the book became a book, it was a manuscript. I talked to these little boys about their experiences and what they knew about the protests and George Floyd and what that phrase, Black Lives Matter, meant. So they shared some of the photos from their participation in the protests. And so as you can see, children were participating all over the country, all around the world. Children were out there marching with their parents and their family members in their communities. And so eventually this book became real. And it was just released a little over, really just a week ago officially. It's still making its way to bookstores and libraries. And I got to visit a community garden, and there were young men there. That's a father of three holding the book, and that's an artist. And they were immediately fascinated by the story. So we took some photos, and then I visited a cousin of mine, and she's a school counselor, and that's her reaction to say their names. And that's a reaction that is very common and that I'm grateful that it touches people's hearts immediately. So that's kind of how this book came to be. It started with that visit to Black Lives Matter Plaza, and I was planning just to do an Instagram post or a Facebook post, and all of a sudden I just kept writing more and more and more, more than what would be inside of a typical post. And then I spent some time reflecting on what I'd written, and I started to think about the children. I started to think about how they were processing these events, how they were feeling, what they might be thinking. And so the voice of a child came to me and simply said, imagine, because clearly there was a lot of despair during that time. There also was a lot of hope. There were people who felt that this time would be different, that it it was a moment that we needed to seize because it was galvanizing people all over the world. The outrage obviously was widespread, and so I started to think about the children, and the voice that came to me said, imagine. Imagine how things could be different. Imagine how we could work toward a society where these types of deadly and brutal and violent encounters don't happen. And so that's really what the story is about. It's about Aaliyah, a 7-year-old girl, asking us to imagine a different kind of way of engaging with one another.
I wanted to ask you, like, the story, like there's poetry in here, and there's also the voice of a baby, of a young girl, and you captured like the voice of her of a young person so well. So, and you just talked about that a little bit, but I'd like to know, like, how did you come up with the full story from the, like, your posts and then incorporating the poetry? What was the process like?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about the writing, but this was one of those instances where it just came out. I was not thinking about how to construct the story. I simply went home and said, I want to write something in response to what I've seen, in response to what I'm feeling. And so this poem came out. And then as I read it to family and friends and started to just kind of play with it a little bit, the voice of a child came to me. And so from the very beginning, it was all about us elevating our thoughts, thinking higher, tapping into our imaginations to create something new and different and more powerful that builds upon the work of our ancestors, which was all about imagining, not accepting things as they appeared to be, or as people would suggest to us they had to be, but really saying, I can imagine a different life for myself. I can imagine a different life for my children. I can imagine a different life for the way we as human beings engage with one another. So it was, I have books where I have labored, where, oh my goodness, weeks, months, even years, back and forth. But that was not the case for this. This book was birthed almost instantly in a really profound way for me. And I'm so grateful.
It's really interesting because it almost sounds like you were like called to write it. Yes. And it's when you talked about thinking initially that you were going to maybe do like a post on Instagram or Facebook, it seemed like the audience, in a way, there would be adults, right? And also we have great works of literature and poetry that are written in a child's voice, but the audience is actually still adults, right? So I'd like to hear you just say a little bit about Writing for children is a really special thing. And I think as an educator and someone who's lived the life you've lived, you've encountered many books for children. And it's a special kind of calling to write from a child's perspective for children about particular topics. And so I want to hear you say a little bit about when you think of yourself as a children's book author, and in particular the author of this book, like why do you write for children? What do you think is important for children to encounter in books made for them? And how is this book a reflection of that for you?
Thank you. Yes. So my journey, I won't go into a lot of detail, but my journey to becoming a children's book author was a happy surprise. It wasn't something that I planned. It wasn't something that I went to school for or got any special training for. As you described, my background is in communications. I started off as a journalist, so I've been writing a lot all of my life, and I've been writing, certainly as a journalist in response to events. And the first children's book I wrote was actually in response to 9/11, and I was living in New Jersey, outside New York City, and I was paying attention to how children were experiencing that. And it didn't start off as a children's book. It started off just like this one as a poem. And then I had a friend who was a second grade teacher, and she said, "You must read that poem to my students." And I said, "But it's really for adults." And she insisted, she persisted. And the next thing you know, I was working on a story for children. And what kept me going, and what has kept me going all these years, is the responses from children. So one of the big responses was from a 12-year-old boy who was living in a group home for abused and neglected children. And he wrote me a thank you letter that said the book changed his life around. And the counselors, here we go again, the counselors called me to say that for 6 months this child had not spoken to anyone and hadn't made any friends. And I came and I read this little book called Find Sunshine on a Rainy Day. And in their words, he opened up like a flower. And so why I write for children is to feed their hunger, to feed their need for information, to feed their need for understanding, how to understand the world, how to identify rightly and positively. I write for children because I want to be a channel for their agency. I write for children because I want to entertain them, and I want to help build community. I want to be a part of children's lives because they give us so much, including the gift of imagination. And one of the things that keeps me hopeful is that I've had these experiences talking to children about difficult topics, and what they give back is just so pure and so thoughtful and so imaginative. I want to be around that kind of energy. So those are some of the big reasons I write for children.
It's so wonderful. And I realize that, we're like, we could keep going because we're so excited to talk to you. But we're also realizing that, people are really here for you and for this book. And so I want to take a pause and ask you, just kind of given what we've talked about already, if maybe you want to share just a little taste. And we'll do this now. We'll do this again later in the conversation. But to give a little taste, I know we have some images of a few pages of the book that we can put up at this point. So if you want to tell us what part of it you might start to show, we'll make sure those load so that other people can see them too.
So we're going to start at the very beginning.
So
pages right there.
Wonderful.
Okay. So there we see little Aaliyah with her Afro puffs and her mom and her dad. And she says, "Mama, Daddy, I want to say their names. Get out the back seat, put a pause on my games, color outside the lines, and loudly proclaim love from myself as I say their names. I look around at the broken, the battered. I hear the cries of the scorned, the tattered. I feel the angels weep. I feel the angels weep. I feel the angels weep. Because these lives mattered. And it makes me want to say their names. Do I think those are two? Yeah.
Mm.
So those are the first couple of pages.
Wow. And the illustrations
Mm.
are just so phenomenal and so empowering.
Mm.
You know, the Afro puffs and the family and the color. It's so fabulous. So why is the story an example of the kind of picture book you want like did you all collaborate or did you just meet up? How did that happen?
Well, a beautiful thing happened on the journey to making this book. And that was in 2020 when the protests were happening and we were all grieving and looking for ways to heal. I was writing and revising and meditating on how to respond and how to respond in a way that children could connect with. And it just so happened that Adrian Brandon, the illustrator, the artist extraordinaire who created this gorgeous book of illustrations, he was going through the same process and he created a series called the Stolen series. And so the Stolen series includes sketches of a number of people who lost their lives to police brutality and violence, and they're black and white sketches. That's how they start off. And then he colors in their faces for 1 minute of every year they lived. And so in the case of George Floyd, it was 46 years. And so he colors in his face for 46 minutes. In the case of Ayanna Stanley Jones, who was just 7, he colors in her face for 7 minutes. And so when you see these portraits next to one another, you see that these people did not get to live a complete life, that their lives were stolen from them. So somehow the publisher discovered Adrian and invited him to be the illustrator for this book. And for me, it's serendipitous. It's just a beautiful coming together, and it's what we can continue to do as we work toward healing. Find our own path for creating art that gives us hope and that may ultimately inspire other people.
I was just going to also say, and I told Caroline this, but we have an image of it that, there's a piece of art that I've had since 2020. And it actually is by the illustrator of this book. And when we were approached, Possible Futures was approached to host this amazing launch conversation. I mean, it was really, a lot of times books are talked about. And it's so interesting when it's picture books as the author is featured, but so much of a picture book is the visual content. And I immediately saw the name and I was taken aback. It felt like this incredible, beautiful thing because it's also an opportunity to support a book by this artist whose work has been literally in our community book space since it was a book space. And so it's really special. We have a picture of it. I don't know if Kevin can find it to put it up, but yeah, there it is. And I know we don't need to leave it up long, but it's on the wall right here in this room that we're sitting in. And I remember getting it off of, I think, Instagram. It was done by him before the series that you talked about that was so widely circulated. And so it's just a special connection. But I see Ife itching to ask
Well,
to ask a question. So I'm gonna zip my little lips.
Like, I love that there's the Black children in the book.
Mm.
So specifically, like, well, there's not a thing. There's not a picture.
It's not just, it's like not.
It's not just Black children. It's like, I love this picture. They look like the little rascals, but these kids are so determined. It's determination on their faces and on their little scooters and
They
bikes.
have a bullhorn. I love
They
that.
have a bullhorn. They're about to have their own little play yard protest. And how did it feel for you when you saw the final product?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, I have a great niece who looks exactly like this illustration of Leah. And I had planned to share her photo. She's a teenager now, but when she was 7 and 8, she had these huge Afro puffs. And so I felt the stars had aligned when I saw the cover of this book. And I just felt so grateful that, again, he and I were thinking along the same lines. And what a lot of people don't know is that often authors and artists don't work together. They don't collaborate on the story. It's really up to the publisher with the artist. And so that's what happened in this case. We didn't get to collaborate, at least not intentionally. It was there. And
spirit level collaboration.
Yeah, and it couldn't have been better. So just so much gratitude for him bringing his imagination to this project. This is the first children's book he's ever illustrated. And so, what a magnificent job he did of interpreting what the words really mean and what I was trying to communicate through Aaliyah.
I love that you showed that picture because it makes me think of a kind of question I'd love to hear your thoughts on, which is just this, there's so much going on in writing for children that is really, like, I think, a positive corrective on many, many years of the unbearable whiteness of children's literature, right? The unbearable whiteness of it. And yet I also, it's like we're looking at that picture and there are a range of children represented, a range of skin tones, backgrounds throughout the book. And so, this sort of, like, when you think about writing a book like this, I'm just curious to hear, like, who are you writing it for? Are and thinking about both, like, all children, but also, are you writing specifically for Black children? I mean, it's from the perspective of a young Black girl, and one who looks like a dear and beloved member of your family. And I guess, like, that's terrain across the kind of industry, if you will, but it also is, it's also deeply personal.
Yes. So I, of course, did not grow up with books like this. I wish I had. And so my work is about representing children of color, and in particular, Black children, because they're here and they are leading these experiences, as you saw these two boys in New Jersey. They were right there with their parents, and so I didn't know them until after I had written the story, but yet they were out there. They were out there like Aaliyah, holding up signs, marching in the street, right there with their parents, and so that story needs to be told, and so often. Throughout the history of children's literature, we've not had the opportunity to share these kinds of stories with Black children, demonstrating their agency, demonstrating their intellectual power and demonstrating their commitment to community and their commitment to collective expression, and how the lives of their ancestors have had an impact on who they are. So this book was written for all children. I have been so fortunate to work with children from all around, from many parts of the country. The parents, teachers have bought my books and shared them with children in different parts of the world. And so I am committed to the idea of oneness, that we as human beings are really one, and we need to reflect that in our conversations, in our activities, in our thoughts, and certainly in our art. And so that's what's happening here. I'm so grateful that Adrian included children of color, diversity in the representation of children. And yet at the same time, it's very important that the child speaking in this story is a 7-year-old Black girl. Oops, you're muted.
Sorry. I also appreciate the fact that over the years, parents have evolved, Black parents, white parents, everyone, about how they have conversations with their children about what's happening in the world. And I sincerely feel like your book is definitely like a catalyst that can help parents. Sometimes I hear from some parents that have young kids, Black and white and otherwise, about how they don't want to traumatize their kids, but the kids are traumatized as they hear it anyway. It's on the news. And now nothing is sacred. They have a phone, they can have access to it. So I'd like to know, what kind of, for teachers and parents as well, and especially, with what's happening in Florida and other states with banning books, how would you like to see them work it into the curriculum, into conversations like that?
Well, a book like this, which, please understand when I say this, it was not intentional. I did not go to Black Lives Matter Plaza thinking I'm going to come away with a book for children. But once it came to me, once it called me, what I understood was that a book like this is a gift for parents and teachers who need to have these conversations with children, because as you said, they are absorbing everything around them. And there's a sense that we want to protect children from all the bad things in the world. And I get that. I totally get that. But what we also need to recognize is that bad things happen. And do we want our children to have the strength and to have the coping skills to manage their lives, to manage their emotions, to manage these experiences when they happen? And I would say the answer is yes. Yes, we do. And this book is a tool for making that happen. It opens the door to the conversations that let us in to the world of our children. I was I don't know if I was reading this, but I heard a man who has an autistic child say, when it seems that you can't connect with the child, it's because they're waiting for you to enter their world. And I thought that was so powerful. And that's what this book is. It's an opportunity to enter a child's world. It's an opportunity to invite them to speak on what they're going through, to, of course, help them find the language to express what they're going through, because sometimes we as adults don't have the language to express, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, or, what we should be feeling or thinking. And so if we need time to process, if we need our friends and our family members and groups to process traumatic events like this, then certainly our children do. I mentioned that the first book was in response to 9/11, and a kindergarten teacher told me that for weeks her children were drawing images of the planes hitting the towers. So they were trying to process what was going on. And so with all the thank you letters that I got, they were supposed to be, all about the writing, but every child drew an image to accompany that thank you letter. And so children are constantly processing what's happening around them, and we need to give them an opportunity to express what's going on and to supply them with the skills that they need to cope with these terrible things that happen in the world. And also, we need their inspiration. We need the gift of their imagination. I have never spoken to a group of children about any traumatic event, from 9/11 to Hurricane Katrina to now this, without them saying something that really lifted my spirits and gave me even more hope. So we as parents and teachers and counselors and librarians and community leaders, we need to be brave enough to enter children's worlds more often.
I love, just like, you have such an amazing regard for young people. And, like, it's what, I don't know, it's what everything we put in front of them should be created with as much regard for them as I think you have. I also, I know you've looked into a little about the kind of just the importance of repeating names and this like practice of retelling, not just, repeating names, but also retelling stories. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that part of it too, because there's the experience of reading the book and there's the poetry in it. But it's also, when you were reading, we didn't really stop to talk about it, but I noticed it so much that you like repeated a particular line in like 3 times. And it made that line such weight.
It's like ritual.
Yes, it's like ritual. And ritual is across cultures, like looks different, but then there's also this deep similarity in the ways that like human beings develop ritual for particular purposes. And I have a feeling that you have thoughts about that.
Yes, so much. Thank you. If we were in person together, there would be call and response all throughout the book. It's just something that's a part of my life experience, my cultural experience. And so it also just happens to be a really powerful way to accelerate children's comprehension of literature. So it's a device I've always used, but in my studies about how to more effectively bring children into the reading experience and how to more effectively help them comprehend what is happening, repetition is the key. Rhyme, repetition are really fundamental. And so it's really, every time I read the book, every time I read the story, I read it differently, but there will always be repetition in it, because for me, it's an effective way to communicate. It's the way I feel the story, and it's the way I want to connect with readers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if this is a good time to ask you if you want to share another little bit of the book. I also want to say hello to some of the people who we know are here in Zima.
Christine Brown, hello.
Hartford Lit is in the house. Barbara, Danielle, Michael. If any of you all have, or anyone else who's watching, we're glad you're here. And if you have any questions, please pop them in. So far, we've just gotten lots of like love and commendation, Caroline, which is, very much what we're all feeling. But do you want to take a moment to kind of give us another taste of the book?
And if you want to do call and response, we're here.
We're here for you.
Just tell us what.
Okay. All right, let's do it. I think we're going to be on the last 2 pages of the book, starting with Let's Perfume the Planet.
There we are.
Okay, beautiful. So when we get to the last page, then I'll ask you guys to do a little call and response with me. Does that work?
That works.
We're ready.
We're ready.
All right, great. Let's perfume the planet. Let's say their names. Let rivers of love wash away this pain. Love for our oneness. Love for our oneness. Love for our oneness we loudly proclaim. Come on and say their names. So I'll ask you to repeat each line that I would say. Speak light.
Speak light.
Say their names.
Say their names.
Speak love.
Speak love.
Say their names.
Say their names.
Speak freedom.
Speak freedom.
Say their names.
Say their names.
Rise, children, rise.
Rise, children, rise.
Say their names.
Say their names.
Ball your fist.
Ball your fist.
Push up your hand.
Push up your hand.
We the people
We the people
take a stand.
must take a stand.
Change gonna come.
Change gonna come
Our demands.
with our demands.
Change gonna come.
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 Change gonna come. Change gonna come. Change gonna come.
Change gonna come. Change gonna come. Change gonna come
With our demands.
with our demands.
Come on
Come on
and say their names.
and say their names. Woo!
Woo! This is what I also mean. Like, I know, like children's books are for the children, like that child part of us, that basic human part of us in all of us. Like you couldn't see us because we were off camera. And I mean, it's obviously, I don't mean to, I'm smiling because it's like, it's a sensory experience, even though of course it's like, it's profound content, right? But it just feels good to read that way with other people.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. That's what hope is all about. You know, this book was a process in terms of starting off with grieving, starting off with mourning, and then finding a way to work through that, as we have so often been called to do, and as we as human beings, if we live long enough, will repeatedly be called to do. And so we need a model. We need a model that helps us on this journey, that brings us to a place where we feel good, where we feel stronger, where we feel more capable, because that's what we want to pass on to our children. They need that from us. They need models of strength. They need models of clarity. They need models of how to make a way out of no way, because so often that's what it feels like. There's no way out. But when we speak to them, when we enter their worlds, they let us know they're ready, they're willing, and they believe. So we owe that to them.
It's so nice that we're having this conversation like right before people are going into classrooms with children, at least here in New Haven.
Absolutely.
The first day of school is actually Monday. Gave away some free glasses of wine over here at Possible Futures to our teachers this afternoon. But this part that you're talking about of entering children's worlds, I'm just wondering if, thinking, we've talked a little bit about families. Ife brought up the point of like sometimes almost like the parental impulse to protect children from topics. And I think you had mentioned, Caroline, or someone had mentioned, it might have been you, Ife, just adults' fear is actually often what keeps them from having honest conversations with children about what they're experiencing and feeling. And, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit to teachers or for teachers in particular, like how do you envision teachers potentially using a book like this in their classroom? And I invite you to think of that question broadly, because some people might immediately think about content, right? What's the book about? But what you also just gave us was an experience of reading it that is both about the content, but also about how we actually read together with young people.
Yes, of course. Thank you. So Raycraft books, they're the other part of the company. Benchmark Education has prepared a teacher's guide for teachers, and so that will be available soon. And I'll make sure you get the information and you can share it with everybody who's interested in this book and the program. And I've also prepared a study guide so that everybody who's participating tonight, parents, children, teachers, librarians, youth leaders, will also have a way for working through this content, which is profound and sometimes heavy, and yet there are some strategies for how to work through it in a way that keeps everybody lifted and hopeful and feeling as if it's a space where their needs are being met. So there are a few quick things I want to share. One of the things I recommend is that teachers and parents and anybody using the book with kids creates an imagination station. So the imagination station is where we're going to tap into our imaginations. We're going to enter children's worlds and invite them to share what they're imagining. And anytime I start a book, and most teachers know this, especially English language arts teachers, when you start a book, you start by asking children questions about what they know. Have they ever heard the phrase, say their names? What does it mean? And then doing a picture walk, through the book, asking them, what are they seeing? What do they think the story is about? Just getting them to get those wheels turning and to start thinking about what the story might be about. And then they can have a discussion about names. This about names. You can ask them, how do you feel about your name? Why do you feel that way? Does your name have a special meaning? Has anybody ever told you your name has a special meaning? Do you like being called by your name? Do you like being called by their name? How do you feel when someone doesn't know your name, forgets your name, and just yells out and says, hey, you? How do you feel when someone sings your name, such as Lauren, Ife, Hoda? How do you feel? So these are ways to help introduce children to the book. And then asking them if they've ever heard of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I've got a description here that they can use, asking them if they've ever heard of George Floyd. What do they know about him? What do they feel when they hear this particular story? And then after discussing that, take time to breathe. Deep breaths with children, because even in the process of writing what the Black Lives Matter movement is about, a quick summary of what happened to George Floyd, I had to step back. I had to breathe. I had to just say, I'm going to take a moment to process this, because it's a lot. It's a lot to think about the fact that people who look like me are often the victims of brutality just because of the color of their skin. And it happens to us as adults, and it also happens to children. So really taking time with children to breathe, and then reading the story, and then asking children after the story is done, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what questions are on their minds, asking them to, inviting them to remember someone they know who has passed on, and to share a memory of that person that makes them smile. So those are some things that can be done. And then I have a section called What the Author Says About Say Their Names. And so I place emphasis on saying names because our names communicate our natures, our identities. I'm named after my Aunt Sue. So there's a history to my name, and there may be a future to my name. And a lot of that is something that we share. Our names also, I grew up in a family that for 30 years has had family reunions. And as part of our family reunions, at the end of the reunion on the last day, we would light candles and we would say the names of those who had passed on. And some of those people had been gone for 100. Some of them might have just died in the last few weeks or months, but it was a way to remember. And this is a ritual that is worldwide. There's a movie called The Song of Names. It came out in 2019. And do you know that movie? And so it's about a little boy who was a violinist, and he moved to London to be with his family that had a master teacher. And while he was away, his family back in Poland was killed during the Holocaust. And so when he finally got back to Poland to try to find out what had happened to his family, he entered a synagogue where they were singing the names of those who had passed on. So it was how they remembered them. And then I was recently speaking to a woman from India, and she told me that she knew of two women in Pakistan who had protested for women's rights, and they were both killed. And every year there are people from the community who go to this particular spot and they say their names. So it's important to know that saying their names is a worldwide ritual. It's a part of many cultures. It's a part of many traditions. And it's important to understand why we say their names. And I'll just offer 3 quick reasons that I really hope that you'll share with children.
Thank you. Yeah. I hope people are writing them down.
Well, I'm gonna give you
about a recording. Actually, you don't have to write it down. You can.
I'll give you this guide, and you can share it with everybody who's a part of today's session. Mm-hmm. So I cannot find who said this, but someone said it. But they said, to remember is to keep alive. And so when we're saying those names, to remember, we're keeping alive the lives of these people. And we hope to keep alive the good things they did. And doing that helps us heal from our hurt, from the hurt of losing them. We say their names to sing them a love song. Mm-hmm. This is something that came to me as I was thinking about what it means to say someone else's name. And you're really saying to them, I love you, I remember you, I appreciate you. And that's what we get from a love song. We get this appreciation. And we say their names to come together in unity so that no one feels alone in their loss. And so it's important to talk to children about what experiences they might have and what it means to them to understand why we say their names. And ultimately, we say their names because in saying their names, we remember their stories, we remember them, and it helps us to imagine and work toward a future that is free of police and racial violence. We can imagine ways to stop people from hurting each other, from harming each other. And if we didn't enter into this ritual of saying their names, it would be like giving up. It would be like saying nothing can change. It's impossible. And of course, when we as Black Americans and African Americans look at our experience here in the United States, we know that our ancestors were constantly imagining a different way of being, a different way of living, a different way of expressing community. And so for me, it's up to us to continue that. And we didn't do it alone. We did it with the help of others. And so this book is about bringing all people together the same way the protests did, to continue to say their names and imagine ways forward.
Ooh. I want to, like, I'm having all kinds of ideas right now, thinking about how to incorporate this book in the children's programming for Lit Fest on October 22nd.
And there are so many local teachers and folks who are doing the same already here. And this conversation tonight will just be such a beautiful supplement to their efforts, and an inspiration too to those who have not yet encountered the book but will, because we're going to make sure that it happens. We're on team Caroline.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's amazing how time flies. We are really very close to time, and we took up time with our questions because we got mostly just wonderful affirmative comments and supportive comments from people who have tuned in. We're so grateful, Caroline, to you for spending this time with us and, picking us to have a conversation with you about this beautiful book, which we have in paperback and in hardcover, thanks to Raycraft, with signatures by Caroline herself. We also want to give a shout out to Adrian Brandon for the beautiful art that has lived here, but also that is living on the page of this book. I see Sherry in the comments saying this was excellent. I'm a grandparent and would like.
That's Rita.
No, that's Rita is Sherry.
Yeah,
Sherry, grandchildren, nieces and nephews come here to Possible Futures, and she's been such a supporter. And she's saying she can't wait to get a copy of the guide. So not just educators, families are the first educators and the forever educators.
Yes. And
so thanks, Caroline, for all you've done by producing this book for us and the others that exist behind it and are coming in the future, no doubt. Any final words from you, Caroline, from you, Ife?
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Thank you to the entire audience. I do want to say at the very end of the guide, it talks about opening up the imagination station so kids can create art, so they can write, so they can draw, so they can dance, whatever comes to them as a way to respond to the story and to the discussion. So I'm looking forward to seeing that artwork. So please email it to me, tag me on social media, or mail it to me. I will include my mailing address as well. But
Caroline's very responsive. And so also, you've been so kind in responding even on Possible Futures Facebook page. And so if you have a question you didn't get to ask, you can look for one of those posts and pose it directly back. to Caroline herself. And I do want to say we have copies here at Possible Futures. You can also order them from our website, www.possiblefuturesbooks.com. You can also come to 318 Edgewood Avenue and just grab some copies. And I also don't want us to end this evening without mentioning Lit Fest. Again, it's coming up later this fall. So
Saturday,
Ife,
October 22nd from 11 to 5 at the Stetson Library and Dixel Q House Plaza. So I hope everyone can come out. We will have some books.
We will have lots of these books. We will also have many other books for children and all that Lit Fest represents and does for community. So thank you, everyone. It's been a beautiful evening. Caroline, we are sending you all the sort of like most warm and thankful, grateful vibes. We look forward to seeing this book get into as many hands as possible and being a part of that.
Thank you.
Other books as well.
Yeah, yeah.
You already are, and I send back love and appreciation to you both and to the entire Possible Futures family, including all the teachers and parents who've been a part of today's talk. Thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Happy weekend and happy first day of school on Monday.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.